I can still feel the sting on my cheek, though it wasn't a slap. It was the warm spit of my own son-in-law sliding down my dress in front of 200 wedding guests. He leaned toward me, his face twisted in contempt, and sneered. "You should have stayed home, old woman. You embarrass us with that rag you call a dress." The ballroom filled with laughter, cruel and sharp, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. I stood there, trembling, clutching the small clutch purse I had carried for years, while my daughter, the bride, my only child, looked away, ashamed not of her husband's behavior, but of me. My name is Linda. I am 65 years old, and on that night, in the middle of the grandest celebration of my daughter's life, I was reduced to less than nothing. My dress was not new, I will admit. It was wine-colored, simple, something I had kept for years because it reminded me of the man I once loved, my late husband. I wore it with pride, thinking it would bring me closer to him on such a special day. But to them it was a costume of poverty. My son-in-law spit on me as if I were filth, and the laughter of his friends turned me into a circus act, the poor old mother of the bride who had dared to show up in a place she didn't belong. Have you ever felt the weight of 200 eyes staring at you, not with kindness, not even with indifference, but with disgust? Have you ever felt the air tighten around your chest until you could hardly breathe, while the people who should love you the most stand by and let it happen? That was my reality in that ballroom in New Orleans. My daughter smirked nervously. Her friends whispered behind manicured hands, and my son-in-law strutted like a victorious peacock who had put me in my place. The humiliation was so complete I almost wished the ground would swallow me. My fingers dug into the fabric of my dress, trying to hold myself together as if the seams of my body might tear apart from shame. The taste of salt filled my mouth, not from the spit, but from the tears I refused to let fall in front of them. For years I had endured their sly comments, the jokes about my old car, the way they rolled their eyes when I brought homemade gifts instead of expensive ones, the pitying glances when I ordered the cheapest item on the menu at family dinners. I told myself I could bear it, that silence was strength. But that night, under the golden chandeliers with my dignity hanging by a thread, I wondered if silence had only made me a target. They believed I was weak. They believed I was invisible. They believed I was powerless. And perhaps you, watching this now, wonder why I didn't scream, why I didn't strike him across the face, why I didn't demand respect in that very moment. The truth is, I didn't need to. Because what no one in that ballroom knew, not my daughter, not my son-in-law, not the laughing guests or the gossiping cousins, was that every step they took on that marble floor, every glass of champagne they raised, every note of music from the orchestra, was paid for by me, and not as a charity, not as a loan, not even as a gift. I paid for it because this hotel, this magnificent ballroom where they were mocking me, belonged to me. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. My son-in-law spit on the dress of the woman who signed his wedding contract. My daughter turned her back on the mother who owned the chandelier hanging over her head. 200 guests ridiculed the woman who had the power to end the celebration with a single word. And I, Linda, the humiliated Linda, the pitiful Linda, the invisible, stood silent, holding a truth so heavy it almost choked me. There is a strange power in silence. They thought it meant weakness, but in reality, it meant patience. It meant strategy. It meant letting them dig their own graves deeper with every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every look of superiority. Because once the truth came out, the fall would be so much harder. I looked around that ballroom at the marble columns, the golden curtains, the polished parquet floor, all of it polished to perfection. I remembered the nights I had walked these halls when no one knew my name, remembered the years of sacrifice, the countless decisions, the business battles fought in silence. While my daughter grew ashamed of my simplicity, I had been building an empire stone by stone, signature by signature. And now here I was, a stranger at my own celebration, mocked for being poor in the palace I had built. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself not to reveal the truth too soon, because there is something you should know about betrayal. The timing of the reveal is everything. A secret told too early is just a story. A secret told at the right moment is an earthquake. That night, as the orchestra played and my humiliation became the evening's entertainment, I knew the earthquake was coming. But let me ask you something. If you were in my place, would you have shouted your power to silence their laughter? Or would you have waited? Let them continue their cruelty, so that when the truth struck, it would annihilate them. Tell me in the comments. Type the number 1 if you think I should have spoken right then and there, and hit like if you think I was right to hold my silence. But let me warn you, the story you are about to hear is not one of patience without consequence. It is not the story of a woman who stayed quiet forever. It is the story of a mother who endured spit on her dress, laughter in her ears, and betrayal from her own daughter, only to rise from that humiliation with a truth so devastating it would turn their perfect celebration into ashes. I can still see the spit mark on my dress when I close my eyes. To them it was a stain of shame. To me it was a symbol, the final insult that unlocked the cage I had built around my own power. They had no idea the walls they mocked me inside belonged to me. They had no idea the chandelier above them was bought with my money. They had no idea the very contracts they signed bore my silent approval. And they had no idea that the woman they dismissed as pathetic, the old woman they ridiculed, was the very owner of their dream wedding. My silence that night was not surrender. It was preparation. Because when the moment came, the laughter that had filled that ballroom would turn to gasps, the sneers would turn to apologies, and the spit they used to humiliate me would become the water that revealed their own reflection, ugly, greedy, and blind. The question is, were they ready to face the truth? And are you ready to hear it? The humiliation that night did not come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of small daggers of whispers, sharpened into blades of silent wounds that had been cut into me for months. My son-in-law, Matthew, had always carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed money made him untouchable. He came from a family that flaunted every dime they ever made luxury cars, parked in driveways they could barely afford vacations, posted on social media, with captions dripping in fake glamour designer suits, tailored tighter than their credit lines. From the very first moment my daughter introduced him to me, I saw the way his eyes scanned me, not as a person, not as the mother of the woman he claimed to love, but as an object of evaluation. My hair too simple, my dress too old, my shoes not polished enough. He measured me against his idea of worth and found me lacking. My daughter Anna, only 28, had inherited some of that arrogance after falling into his orbit. She used to be gentle, a girl who loved homemade cookies and hand-sewn dresses. But as her relationship with Matthew grew, she began to cringe at my thrift store clothes, roll her eyes when I brought a casserole to dinner, laugh a little too loudly at his jokes about poor people. I told myself it was just the blindness of love that she would grow out of it. But love can be a poison when mixed with ambition. And I learned the taste of that poison one evening, weeks before the wedding. It was a Thursday night late, and I had gone to the hotel to inspect some renovations in one of the smaller ballrooms. As owner, I often walked the halls at night when no one expected me, blending in with the cleaning staff, listening, observing. I wore my plain coat, carried my old purse, and to the outside eye, I was nothing more than another tired woman with no power in the world. That disguise had always served me well. It let me hear truths people would never speak in front of someone they thought mattered. That night, as I turned a corner near the main lounge, I froze at the sound of familiar voices. Matthew's voice, smooth but laced with contempt, carried across the polished marble. He didn't see me, and I thanked the shadows for that. He was with two of his friends' men who had always looked at me with the same mocking eyes he did. They were laughing, glasses of whiskey in hand, their jackets thrown carelessly over chairs, like kings in a conquered castle. And then I heard it. God, can you believe Anna's mother, Matthew, snorted. She actually thinks showing up in that sad little dress is appropriate. She'll ruin the pictures. I told Anna if that woman dares to stand close to us during the ceremony, I'll move her to the back row. She looks like a beggar who stumbled into the Ritz. Laughter exploded from his companions, harsh and metallic, bouncing off the high ceiling. I swear one of them said if she weren't Anna's mother, I'd think she was the cleaning lady sneaking in for free champagne. Matthew leaned back, his tone dropping into something more venomous. She is pathetic. I mean, Anna's embarrassed, but I'm beyond embarrassed. What's worse is she doesn't even realize she drags us down. I've worked hard to get into circles that matter, and then she comes waddling in with her Goodwill handbag like she belongs. Every word was a blade. Every word pierced deeper than spit or laughter ever could. But then came the sentence that shifted everything inside me from pain to rage. But hey, Matthew continued, don't worry. I'll handle her. After the wedding, Anna and I will have her sign over her little apartment. We'll move in until we buy our real house. The old woman doesn't need it. It's wasted space. She's too old to deserve anything better. His friend chuckled cruelly. You think she'll agree, Matthew smirked. She's weak. She's always been weak. One push and she'll crumble. They clinked glasses celebrating my imagined destruction, my dispossession, my erasure from my own life. I stood there in the shadows, my nails biting into my palms until I almost bled. Weak. That was the word that echoed in my skull like a curse. For 65 years, I had survived storms they could never imagine. I had buried a husband, raised a daughter on my own, built a business empire brick by brick, all while pretending to be invisible so no one would target me for what I truly had. Weak, no. But invisible, yes. And invisibility had its price. It had allowed Matthew to believe his words had no consequences. It had allowed my daughter to treat me like an accessory she could hide in a closet. It had allowed strangers to laugh at me while standing on floors I had paid for. I walked away quietly that night, my heart pounding in my ears, my throat burning with unshed tears. I wanted to scream to step out of the shadows and watch his smug face crumble. But I didn't, because the truth is, anger is powerful, but timing is power perfected. I carried his words home like a poison, and all night I lay awake replaying them over and over, the sound of glasses clinking of men, laughing at the life I had sacrificed for my daughter. By morning, I knew something had changed inside me, something irreversible. I would no longer let them believe I was powerless. I would no longer let them spit on my dignity. But I also knew that exposing myself too soon would only give them time to spin lies, to twist narratives, to play the victims. No. My silence would continue, but now it was sharpened into a weapon. They would mock me openly, and when they thought they had won, when they believed they had broken me completely, then I would strike. And the strike would not be with words alone. It would be with the truth that could not be denied. But the days that followed tested my resolve. Anna stopped visiting me altogether. She texted me only when she needed money for another wedding expense, though she had no idea the bills were being routed through accounts I controlled. Every time I saw her face, every time I heard her laugh with Matthew, I saw the little girl I once held in my arms fading further away. It hurt more than Matthew's contempt, more than the spit, more than the laughter of strangers. The betrayal of a daughter is a wound that never fully closes, and yet I forced myself to remember Matthew's voice, "She's weak." That single word became my anchor. It became my reason to stand tall when everything inside me wanted to collapse. I would prove him wrong. Not with screams, not with desperate pleas, but with the kind of revelation that would leave him choking on his own arrogance. Still in those weeks, I felt the walls close in. Invitations arrived addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Matthew Carter, as if Anna's identity had already been absorbed into his. Decisions about the wedding were made without me, except when they needed a check signed. And every time I walked into their circle, I felt the smirks, the whispers, the subtle digs. "Oh, Linda, you should get a new dress. That one is..." Charmingly vintage. Linda, don't worry about the photos. We can have you sit a little to the side. Each comment was dipped in sugar, but I could taste the venom beneath. They thought they were clever. They thought I didn't notice, but I noticed everything, every smirk, every laugh, every glass raised at my expense. And while they believed I was shrinking, I was only gathering strength. Because when the truth came, I wanted it to be undeniable. The night of the rehearsal dinner, it happened again. I slipped away to the hallway for a moment of silence, and once more I heard voices drifting from behind the kitchen doors. This time, it was Matthew and Anna. My heart cracked as I heard my daughter's voice, sharp and impatient. "Matthew, she's going to embarrass us. I told you if she shows up in that stupid dress, everyone will laugh. Can't you do something?" His reply was a dagger straight through me. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll take care of it. That woman doesn't know her place, but she will. After tomorrow, she'll have no choice but to give us what we need." My knees trembled. My breath caught. I pressed my back to the wall, invisible in the shadows once again. They were plotting against me together, not just Matthew, but Anna, too. My daughter. My flesh and blood. She wasn't protecting me. She wasn't even neutral. She was handing me over like a pawn in their game. And that was the moment I felt something in me die. The mother who excused, who forgave, who endured silently for the sake of peace, she was gone. In her place was someone else, someone who had been forged in betrayal and humiliation, someone who would no longer be content to hide behind thrift store dresses and polite smiles. I returned to my table that night, forcing a smile for the guests, sipping water as if nothing had happened. But inside me, the storm was raging, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the walls of silence I had built for decades would come crashing down. The only question was when. And I promised myself it would be at the exact moment when their cruelty reached its peak, when their arrogance blinded them completely. That would be the moment to reveal everything. That would be the moment to remind them whose ballroom they were standing in. That would be the moment to show them what weak truly meant. If round one was the moment I realized the cruelty of my son-in-law's contempt, round two was when I began to see the web of lies stretching far beyond his arrogance. Betrayal never travels alone. It is always accompanied by secrets, debts, and shadows. And sometimes those shadows whisper the truth to ears willing to listen. A few days after the rehearsal dinner, I went to the hotel early in the morning. I told myself it was to check on the flower arrangements and the kitchen staff, but in truth, I needed space, a sanctuary where my thoughts could breathe. I walked through the quiet hallways, the chandeliers still unlit the marble floors reflecting the soft gray of dawn. The scent of polished wood and fresh linens filled the air. This was my kingdom, yet no one knew it. I had built an empire in silence, hiding behind plain dresses and discount shoes because I believed protection came from invisibility. And for decades, it had worked. No one suspected the woman with the second-hand purse was the owner of this grand hotel chain. But invisibility is a double-edged sword. It protects you from envy, but it also invites mockery. That morning, I found myself questioning the cost of all those years of disguise. I had just turned a corner near the service elevator when I ran into Clara, one of the longest-serving employees in the hotel. Clara was in her late 50s, her uniform crisp, her eyes sharp as ever. She had worked here nearly as long as I had owned the place, though she thought I was just another familiar face who liked to wander the halls. "Mrs. Linda," she whispered, glancing around as if afraid someone might hear, "do you have a moment?" There was something urgent in her voice, something that carried the weight of unspoken truths. I nodded and followed her into the laundry room where the hum of machines provided a cloak of privacy. She closed the door behind us and lowered her voice. "I shouldn't say this, but you deserve to know. The groom's family, they are drowning in debt. The whispers among the vendors are true. They owe money to everyone, florists, caterers, even the jewelers. They paid deposits late, and some were covered by loans I doubt they can repay. They are putting on a grand show, but it's all smoke and mirrors. My stomach tightened. I had suspected their wealth was fragile, but hearing it confirmed was like a crack in the facade I had been watching. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice careful, steady, though inside me a fire was starting to burn. Clara nodded firmly. One of the waiters overheard Mr. Carter arguing with a creditor on the phone, right here in the hallway. He was begging for more time, said the wedding would change everything. "Linda, they are banking their future on this marriage on your daughter, on appearances." She hesitated, then added, "And they speak about you with such disdain. They think you are a nobody, but I've seen the way the manager treats you, the respect in his eyes. You're not who they believe you are you?" Her question hung in the air like smoke. I looked at her, my heart pounding, and for a moment I considered telling her everything, revealing the truth of who I was. But then I remembered Matthew's words. "She's weak. She'll crumble." No. The truth would have to wait, so I shook my head lightly and forced a faint smile. "I'm just Anna's mother," I whispered. But inside, the resolve hardened. Clara had given me a gift that morning, a confirmation of what I already suspected. Their empire was an illusion built on borrowed time and borrowed money, and they dared to spit on me, the one person who could crush or save them with a single decision. The irony was almost unbearable. As I left the laundry room, the corridors of the hotel seemed different. The walls whispered back the secrets I had just heard. I saw the chandeliers not as ornaments, but as silent witnesses to generations of deceit and pride. And I thought of my daughter, Anna. Did she know? Did she understand that the man she was marrying, the man she had chosen over her own mother, was not a prince, but a pauper in a rented suit? Or was she blinded by the glimmer of rings and the empty promise of wealth? I remembered a time years ago when Anna was just a girl. She had found a box of old photographs in my closet, pictures of me and her father, standing in front of the first hotel we had ever purchased. Our smiles wide, our dreams larger than the building itself. "Why don't we live in a big house like the people in these magazines?" she had asked me, pointing at the glossy pages of her friend's fashion catalog. I had crouched down, taken her tiny hands in mine, and said, "Because safety is more important than showing off. If people don't know what we have, they can't take it from us." I thought I was teaching her humility, but perhaps what she learned was shame. She grew to resent my modesty, mistaking it for failure, never realizing it was protection. And now here we were years later with her marrying a man who embodied everything I had shielded us against greed, pride, and the desperate hunger for appearances. That afternoon, as the vendors bustled about, setting up tables and arranging flowers, I sat in the far corner of the ballroom unnoticed, blending in as always. I watched the gilded mirrors reflect images of people pretending to be grander than they were, and I wondered how long their performance could last. My heart ached not for myself, but for Anna. She was walking into a trap, a gilded cage built from lies and debt. And she was doing it willingly, laughing, smiling, looking down on me, as if I were the embarrassment, when in truth I was the only one standing on solid ground. It was almost unbearable to watch, almost. But then I remembered the secret I carried, the ownership papers locked away, the accounts that tied this hotel chain to my name. They had no idea they were standing in my empire, mocking me on my own throne. That thought gave me strength. But secrets have a way of pressing against their walls until they demand release. Later that evening, as the rehearsal came to a close, I found myself cornered by one of Matthew's relatives, a woman with sharp eyes and a tongue even sharper. She leaned close and whispered, "Why don't you save us all the embarrassment and sit in the back tomorrow? People are already wondering how Anna came from you. This is her big day. Don't ruin it." Her words sliced through me like ice. I smiled, politely nodded, and walked away without a word. But inside, something cracked. The humiliation was not just private anymore. It was orchestrated, coordinated, a chorus of contempt. And I realized then that if I kept silent forever, if I allowed them to bury me under their sneers, Anna would never see the truth. She would never know the difference between appearance and substance, between empty pride and real power. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my modest apartment. The peeling paint, the creak of the pipes, the faint hum of the city outside, all of it was part of the disguise I had chosen. But for the first time in decades, I questioned that choice. Had I hidden too well? Had I disguised myself so perfectly that even my own daughter believed I was worthless? Invisibility had been my shield, but now it was a prison. And I knew the day of escape was coming. I could feel it pressing closer with every insult, every whisper, every debt-laden smile of Matthew's family. The secret could not stay buried much longer. The question was not if I would reveal it, but when. And I promised myself. When the truth finally came, it would not be a whisper in the shadows. It would be thunder in the ballroom. By the time the wedding day arrived, the weight of contempt had grown so heavy it pressed against my chest like a stone. I had endured whispers and smirks before, but that morning it was no longer subtle. It was open. It was bold. It was the laughter of people who believed they had cornered their prey. I walked into the grand ballroom hours before the ceremony began, and immediately I felt the eyes on me. Not eyes of warmth or curiosity, but of mockery. Guests in glittering gowns and men in pressed tuxedos turned their heads, glanced at my thrift store dress, and whispered behind jeweled hands. My daughter Anna stood at the center of it all, radiant in her lace gown, her hair styled to perfection, her smile wide and practiced. She saw me enter, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw a flicker of softness in her eyes, the little girl who once clung to my skirt when she was afraid. But then Matthew leaned in, whispered something in her ear, and the flicker vanished. She turned away. The bride had chosen her side. At first I tried to remain unnoticed, sitting quietly at a side table, folding my hands in my lap. But silence in a room full of cruelty only paints a target on your back. A group of young cousins approached, their laughter bubbling like poisoned champagne. "Look," one of them said, pointing at my shoes. "They're older than I am." The others giggled, their polished fingernails glinting under the chandeliers. Another cousin added, "She looks like she wandered in from the street. Who even let her in here?" Their voices carried farther than they realized, and the ripple of laughter spread until it felt as though the entire room was vibrating with mockery. My face burned. I pressed my hands against the table, trying to steady myself, but the humiliation cut deeper than I expected. And then came the final blow. Anna herself walked over. For a moment, I thought she had come to defend me to stop the cruelty, but instead she leaned close, her voice sharp enough to slice through bone. "Mother," she said quietly but firmly, "please don't sit near the main table. You'll ruin the photographs. People will think, you don't belong." She glanced around, making sure others were listening, making sure my exile was not private, but public. Then she straightened, smoothed her gown, and walked back to Matthew, who smirked with the smugness of a man who believed he had won. The sting of her words was worse than Matthew's spit, worse than the laughter of strangers, because it came from the child I had raised alone, the child I had sacrificed for the child I had protected, with everything I had. And now she cast me out like a shameful secret. I gathered my purse, rose slowly from the table, and walked toward the farthest corner of the ballroom. The whispers followed me like shadows. "Did you see her dress pathetic? I heard she lives in some tiny apartment. No wonder. Why would Anna's mother be so ordinary?" I lowered myself into a chair near the exit, hidden behind a column. From there, I watched the world I had built twist into a spectacle of cruelty. It felt as if the walls themselves were pressing in, suffocating me, reminding me of every insult I had endured. My heart pounded against my ribs, a drumbeat of shame and rage. I wanted to leave, to flee, to never see any of them again. For a moment, I truly believed I might collapse under the weight of it all. But then as I sat there fighting tears, my mind drifted backward into the corridors of memory, to a time when life was not filled with laughter at my expense, but with dreams. I remembered the early days with my husband Richard. We were young then, barely more than children ourselves, standing in front of the first shabby building we bought. It wasn't grand, not even close. The paint was peeling, the pipes groaned, the roof leaked. But to us it was a palace. We worked day and night painting walls, scrubbing floors, greeting guests with smiles, even when our bodies ached. I remember standing at the reception desk late one night, Richard's hand on mine, whispering, "One day, Linda, this will be more than a hotel. It will be a legacy." He believed in us, in our ability to turn brokenness into beauty. And he was right. Brick by brick, deal by deal, we built something that endured long after he was gone. When cancer took him, I thought the dream might die with him. But I kept going. For Anna, for the promise we had made, for the empire we had imagined. That empire stood around me now, dressed in gold and marble, its chandeliers shining brighter than ever. And yet here I was invisible within it, mocked inside the very palace I had built with my own hands. The irony was so sharp it almost cut me open. My daughter looked at me and saw poverty. My son-in-law spit on me and saw weakness. The guests laughed at me and saw failure. But what they didn't see was the truth. The truth that every brick in those walls had my fingerprints on it. The truth that every paycheck Matthew's family envied came from contracts I had signed. The truth that I could end this celebration with one phone call. They saw only what I allowed them to see, and in that moment I began to question whether my disguise had become my curse. I wiped my eyes and forced myself to stand tall, even in my hidden corner. My heart whispered Richard's words, "This will be a legacy." And suddenly I felt something shift inside me. The humiliation was still there, burning, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. Every laugh, every whisper, every smirk was a log tossed onto a fire that had been smoldering for too long. They thought they had broken me, but in truth, they had only awakened me. As the ceremony drew closer, I sat in silence, gathering strength, though to the others, I must have looked like a defeated old woman hiding in the shadows. I watched Matthew strut about charming guests with his hollow smile. I watched Anna bask in the glow of attention, her laughter as brittle as glass. I watched their families posture and preen, pretending to be wealthier, stronger, grander than they were, and I thought of Clara's words, of the debts piling high, of the creditors, waiting just beyond the doors. Their empire was paper thin, and mine, though invisible, was made of stone. But even as I steeled myself, even as I promised I would no longer crumble, I felt the walls of isolation closing tighter. No one came to sit with me. No one offered a kind word. I was alone in a room full of people who bore my blood and carried my name. That loneliness was heavier than any insult. I pressed my hands together, whispered a prayer for strength, and forced myself to breathe. And then, as if the universe had decided I had endured enough, for one night I looked up and saw him, Mr. Dawson, the hotel's general manager. He stood at the far end of the ballroom, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. For a moment, I thought he might look away, pretend not to see me like everyone else had. But he didn't. He held my gaze steady, unwavering, respectful. And in his eyes, I saw something no one else in that room had given me recognition. Not pity, not mockery. Recognition. He inclined his head ever so slightly, a gesture no one else noticed, but one that spoke volumes. It was as if he were saying, "Whenever you are ready, the stage is yours." A shiver ran down my spine. For years, Dawson had known the truth of who I was. He had respected my desire for privacy, never once betraying my secret. But in that moment, in that silent exchange across the ballroom, I realized he was ready. He was waiting. He was giving me the signal that my invisibility could end whenever I chose. My breath caught my heart racing. The guests laughed, the music swelled. Anna and Matthew preened for photographs, oblivious. But in that corner behind the marble column, I felt the first crack of light breaking through the walls of my disguise. And I knew, though, I wasn't ready yet, the moment was coming. The earthquake I had promised myself was on its way. The only question was whether I had the courage to let it strike. I thought I had already reached the lowest point. I thought being spat on, laughed at, and exiled to the corner of the ballroom was humiliation enough. But that night taught me there are deeper shadows than shame. There is the suffocating weight of believing you are truly alone in the world, abandoned by the very blood that should protect you. As the ceremony began, I remained seated at the farthest edge, my chair almost hidden by a marble column. From there, I could barely see Anna walking down the aisle, her veil floating behind her like a banner of triumph. The guests rose to their feet in reverent silence, their eyes full of admiration, and I sat invisible, my heart aching as I realized I was not part of her triumph, but a stain she had scrubbed away. My daughter, my only child, walked into a new life without me. The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged, the applause thundered. I wanted to cry not from pride, but from grief. Grief for the little girl who used to braid flowers into my hair, who used to crawl into my bed on stormy nights, whispering, "Don't leave me, Mama." That little girl was gone, replaced by a woman who looked at me as if I were a burden she had carried too long. The final blow came during the family photographs. The photographer, a tall man with a booming voice, called out names, arranging everyone into neat rows. When he glanced at me standing awkwardly at the back, he frowned. "And this is," Matthew smirked. "Oh, just the mother of the bride. Better take those shots without her. Don't want to ruin the aesthetic." Laughter rippled through the group. My stomach lurched as the photographer nodded and turned away, positioning them without me. My own daughter didn't object. She posed gracefully, smiling as if nothing had happened, as if her mother did not exist. I felt my knees weaken. I stumbled back into the shadows, pressing a hand against the cold wall to keep myself upright. For a moment, the ballroom swayed the chandeliers above, blurring into waves of light. I thought I might collapse right there on the marble floor. In that dizzy moment, my mind fled to the past, to a time when life was not cruel, but full of promise. I saw Richard again, my husband standing beside me in the lobby of our very first hotel. The paint had smelled sharp, the floorboards creaked, and the sign above the door hung crooked. But his smile had been steady, his arm firm around my shoulders. "Linda." He had said, his voice full of quiet conviction. "One day, these walls will carry our name. One day, people will look at us and see strength." I had believed him with all my heart, and together we worked night after night, turning dreams into reality. I remembered the way he used to hum as he fixed broken pipes, the way he poured coffee for exhausted staff at midnight, the way he kissed Anna's forehead when she was just a baby and whispered, "This is all for you." When he died, I thought I could carry it all alone. I thought Anna would walk beside me, but now I stood alone in a room full of marble and gold, and not one soul wanted me there. The grief was unbearable. My hands trembled as I clutched the edge of a table, my vision swimming. For a terrifying moment, I considered leaving, walking out into the night, disappearing forever, letting them have their triumph without me. I imagined myself stepping into the cold air, wandering the streets until the city swallowed me whole. Would anyone even notice? Would anyone care? My daughter certainly wouldn't. She had already erased me. But then, just as the darkness threatened to consume me, I heard Richard's voice again, not in memory but in my heart, as if he were whispering across time. "Linda, you are stronger than this. You are not invisible. You are the foundation." The words echoed inside me, pulling me back from the brink. I closed my eyes, forcing a slow breath into my lungs, grounding myself in his memory. The ballroom noise faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. I realized then that walking away would not save me. It would only confirm what they believed, that I was weak, powerless, irrelevant. No. If Richard's dream was to become a legacy, I could not abandon it now, not when the people mocking me were standing inside the very empire he and I had built. The rest of the evening unfolded like a cruel play staged for my torment. During dinner, the waitstaff seated me at a small table near the kitchen doors, far from the main hall where the families dined on fine china. My plate was delivered late cold, almost as an afterthought. Guests passed by me as though I were part of the furniture, their laughter a soundtrack to my isolation. I forced myself to chew each bite not for nourishment, but for survival, as if eating meant proving I still existed. I watched Matthew raise his glass, delivering a toast dripping with false gratitude, thanking his family, his friends, his mentors. He did not mention me. Anna clinked her glass to his, her smile radiant, her eyes never once seeking me out. Every second was a dagger, every minute stretched like an eternity. By dessert, I felt hollow scraped clean of pride, of hope, of worth. It was the deepest abyss I had ever known, and yet even in that abyss a spark remained, a spark of anger, of truth, of defiance. Because while they dined on borrowed credit, they laughed inside walls I owned. While they toasted false wealth, they raised glasses beneath chandeliers I had purchased. While they erased me from their photographs, their memories, their lives, they did so inside a palace that bore my unseen name. The irony twisted inside me like a blade, but it was also a promise. Their cruelty was building the stage for my revelation. Near the end of the night, as the orchestra played its final set, I sat once more in my corner, my back aching, my soul weary. The guests began to disperse, still laughing, still whispering. I thought the torment was over. But then Matthew approached, his smirk, wide his breath, thick with wine. He leaned down close enough for only me to hear. "Enjoy your little seat in the shadows, old woman. This is the last party you'll ever attend with us. After tonight, Anna and I don't need you. We'll take what we want from you, and you can fade into nothing." He straightened Pat my shoulder mockingly and walked away before I could respond. My hands clenched into fists, my vision blurred with fury. And for the first time that night, I felt not grief, but fire. His arrogance was complete, his contempt total. And that meant the time was nearly here. The earthquake I had promised myself was rumbling beneath the surface, waiting for release. As I sat there trembling with rage and resolve, I felt a presence beside me. I turned, and there he was, Mr. Dawson, the general manager. He leaned close, his voice low, his eyes steady. "Mrs. Linda," he whispered, using the name only he knew. "Everything is ready. The documents, the announcements, the staff. Whenever you give the word, the truth will come out." My breath caught my heart racing. I looked at him, my throat tight with emotion. He nodded once firmly. "You don't have to endure this any longer. Just say when." Then he straightened, blending back into the crowd before anyone else noticed. I sat frozen, Dawson's words echoing in my ears. Everything is ready. The stage was set, the curtain waiting to be pulled back. The question was whether I had the courage to step into the light. As I stared at the marble floors, at the chandeliers above, at the guests who still sneered in my direction, I knew the choice was mine. And I also knew, though fear gripped me, that the time for silence was ending. The storm was about to break. When Mr. Dawson whispered those words to me, "Everything is ready," it was as if the ground shifted beneath my feet. For hours I had sat in silence, absorbing insult after insult, humiliation layered upon humiliation, until my heart felt carved hollow. But in that single moment, a spark ignited inside me. It was the reminder I had been waiting for, the proof that invisibility was not weakness but choice, and choice meant power. My silence had never been submission. It had been strategy. The question now was whether I had the courage to use it. I sat there for a long while, gripping the arm of my chair, staring at the marble floor where Matthew's spit had landed earlier in the evening. I traced the memory of that wet stain, how it had burned into my skin, and I realized something. He thought that spit had broken me. He thought it had reduced me to less than nothing. But in truth, it had baptized me into a new self. The Linda who sat quietly, who endured, who hid behind thrift store clothes, had died in that moment. In her place was someone new, someone who would no longer tolerate silence as protection, but wield it as a weapon. As the guests continued to chatter, unaware of the storm gathering in the corner, I rose from my seat and walked toward the staff corridor. My steps were slow at first, hesitant, but with every stride, the weight on my chest grew lighter. I slipped past the gilded doors, leaving behind the glitter, and the laughter entering the quieter world of the hotel's backstage. The hum of refrigeration units, the clatter of dishes, the murmurs of staff. It was like crossing a threshold into reality after hours of suffocating theater. And there, waiting by the service desk, stood Dawson. He was tall, his shoulders straight, his expression calm, but firm. In his hands, he carried a leather folder. "I thought you might come," he said softly, handing it to me. I took the folder, my fingers trembling. Inside were the documents, deeds, contracts, certificates of ownership, all bearing my name. The proof of what I had built, the truth I had hidden for so long. My throat tightened as I flipped through the pages, memories flooding me with every line of ink. The night Richard and I signed our first purchase agreement, the day I completed the merger that expanded us into 3 states, the moment I watched the ink dry on the papers that gave me this very hotel. Each document was a testament to decades of labor sacrifice and resilience, and each one was a weapon sharper than any insult Matthew had hurled. "You don't have to endure this anymore," Dawson said gently. "They think you are powerless. But the moment you step forward, the truth will crush their arrogance. It's your choice. We are ready when you are." I closed the folder and held it tight against my chest. For the first time that evening, my spine straightened, my shoulders squared, my breath came steady. I was no longer a woman trembling in the shadows. I was the owner of everything they had mocked me inside. I looked at Dawson and nodded. "Not yet," I whispered. "Let them believe they've won a little longer. The higher their pride climbs, the harder their fall will be." Dawson's lips curved into a faint smile. "As you wish, but when you give the signal, everything will change." I returned to the ballroom through the service door, the folder hidden inside my purse. The moment I stepped back into the glittering light, I felt different. The chandeliers no longer seemed like indifferent witnesses. They were mine. The marble beneath my shoes no longer felt cold. It was my foundation. And the laughter echoing through the hall no longer pierced me as it had before. It sounded hollow now, like the brittle glass of a vase ready to shatter. They didn't know it yet, but they were laughing inside a cage whose keys rested in my hands. I slipped back into my seat at the corner, watching them with new eyes. Matthew was boasting to his friends again, waving his glass of champagne as though it were a scepter. Anna was at his side, her smile strained but obedient. Their families mingled drunk on the illusion of power and wealth. None of them spared me a glance. They thought they had already erased me, and that was my advantage. The invisibility they mocked was the cloak I would use to strike unseen until it was too late. As I sat there, my mind raced with possibilities. Should I stand now, interrupt the orchestra, hold up the documents, and declare the truth? The thought tempted me, the vision of Matthew's smirk crumbling in front of hundreds electrifying. But no, not yet. Timing mattered. If I revealed too soon, they might twist it, paint me as a bitter old woman stealing attention from her daughter's wedding. No. I needed to wait until the arrogance peaked, until their cruelty left no room for sympathy. Then when the truth burst forth, no one could deny it. But the decision was no longer if only when. I had crossed the line inside myself. There was no going back. The woman who might have slipped away quietly into the night was gone. The woman who would rise and claim her place had been born. The rest of the evening passed in a haze, my ears half deaf to the laughter and music, my eyes fixed on the stage I would soon claim. And yet even in my newfound resolve, I felt a tremor of doubt. Would Anna hate me forever if I humiliated her husband? Would she see me not as her mother, but as the destroyer of her perfect night? The thought pierced me. For all her cruelty, for all her betrayal, she was still my child. I loved her with a love that no insult could erase. The battle raging inside me was not against Matthew alone, but against the possibility of losing Anna completely. And yet I reminded myself she had already cast me aside. She had laughed at me, excluded me, erased me. If she could do that without the truth, then perhaps only the truth could bring her back. Sometimes only fire can burn away illusion. The orchestra swelled, the final dance began, the guests clapped and cheered. I remained in my corner, my hand resting on the folder hidden in my purse. My heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with anticipation. The storm was no longer distant. It was here, pressing against the walls, ready to break. I looked across the room at Matthew. He raised his glass, his smirk wide, his arm tight around Anna's waist. His eyes scanned the crowd with smug satisfaction, as if he had conquered the world. He did not look at me. He did not need to. In his mind, I no longer existed. And that I realized was the perfect setup for his downfall. Because when the truth came, it would not be quiet. It would not be a whisper. It would be an earthquake. And the man who spat on my dress, who mocked my existence, who plotted to steal my home, would find himself standing not on a throne, but on rubble. Let me ask you something. If you were me, would you have revealed the truth right then and there? Would you have stood up, stopped the music, and told 200 guests that the ballroom, the chandeliers, the marble floor all belonged to you? Or would you have waited? Let their arrogance swell a little longer, so that when the fall came, it would destroy them completely. Tell me in the comments, type the number 1 if you think I should have spoken immediately and hit. Like if you believe patience was the sharper blade. Because I will tell you this, that night I chose patience. But patience in my hands was not weakness. It was the calm before the storm. And the storm was already gathering. The chance came when the music dipped and the crowd shifted toward the dessert tables. Matthew slipped away from the center of attention, striding toward the VIP lounge reserved for the wedding party. I followed quietly, my heels clicking against the marble, each step a drumbeat in my chest. The hall grew silent behind me, the laughter fading as I pushed the heavy door and entered. Inside the lounge was dimmer, the air heavy with cigar smoke and brandy. Matthew stood by the window, his jacket unbuttoned, his glass half full, the city lights glittering behind him, like a kingdom he believed he owned. He turned startled at first to see me, then sneering when recognition settled. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "This room is for family." I closed the door behind me, locking it softly, my fingers steady now. "I am family," I replied, my tone, even my eyes fixed on his. "At least for now." He laughed sharp and bitter, swirling his drink. "Barely. You're nothing but Anna's charity case. She keeps you around because you're her mother. But let's be honest, you're an embarrassment. Tonight proved that. Sitting in your corner with your thrift store dress while real families celebrate. You should be grateful we even let you in." His words struck like stones, but they no longer broke me. I had walked too far past shame to be shattered by cruelty. Instead, I stepped closer, placing my purse gently on the table between us. "Is that what you think I asked quietly? That I am nothing? That you and your family are the real ones with power here?" Matthew smirked, his teeth glinting in the low light. "Exactly. Look around you. Do you see anyone running to sit by you? Do you see anyone taking your side? No. Because they know what you are. Old, poor, weak. And soon Anna and I will take the only thing you have left, your apartment. That's the plan. And you'll sign it over with a smile because you won't have the courage to fight us. I let his words hang in the air, his arrogance filling the room like smoke. Then slowly, deliberately, I reached into my purse and pulled out the leather folder Dawson had given me. I laid it on the table and slid it toward him. "Open it." He frowned, suspicion flickering across his face. "What is this?" "More of your pitiful letters. Maybe a plea for us to keep you around, save it, old woman?" "Open it," I repeated, my voice steady as steel. With a scoff, he set down his glass and flipped the folder open. His eyes scanned the first page, an ownership certificate bearing the name Linda Harris in bold letters. His smirk faltered. He turned the page, then another and another. Deeds, contracts, signatures, documents binding every corner of the hotel chained to me. His face paled as he realized what he was holding. This can't be real. He whispered, his fingers trembling as he flipped faster, desperately seeking a flaw, a loophole. You own this hotel, this entire chain. I leaned forward, my gaze piercing his. Yes, every chandelier above your head, every marble tile beneath your feet, every glass of champagne your guests are drinking tonight, all of it is mine. And you dared to spit on me inside my own palace. He stumbled back the folder, slipping from his hands onto the table with a heavy thud. His jaw clenched, his eyes darting between me and the documents, as if the truth might vanish if he blinked hard enough. "No," he muttered. "It's not possible. You dress like... you live like what?" I cut him off, my voice sharp. "Like someone beneath you, like someone unworthy of respect." That was the point, Matthew. I chose to live quietly, invisibly, because visible wealth attracts predators like you. I let Anna believe I was simple because I wanted her to value character over appearances. But tonight, your arrogance has forced my hand. He slammed his glass down, shattering it across the floor. If this is true, he hissed, his face twisted with desperation. Then you've been lying to Anna her entire life. You let her grow ashamed of you, humiliated to have a poor mother when all along you were sitting on millions. Do you know what she'll do when she finds out she'll hate you? She'll despise you for deceiving her. His words cut because I knew there was truth in them. But I did not flinch. I stepped closer until we were eye to eye, my voice a quiet blade. She already despises me, Matthew. She proved that tonight. But what she has not realized yet is that she married a man drowning in debt, clinging to illusions of wealth that don't exist. You promised her the world, but you can't even pay for the roof above your head. And when she learns that when the mask falls, she will see who truly betrayed her. For the first time all night, Matthew had no smirk, no retort. Only fear flickered in his eyes, fear that the empire he had constructed from lies was about to crumble. He tried to gather himself, straightening his jacket, forcing his voice into something resembling control. "Fine," he said coldly. "So you have money. So you own this place. That doesn't change anything. Anna is mine now. She'll stand with me. You'll die alone with your papers and your secrets." I looked at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Maybe. But tonight is not about my death, Matthew. Tonight is about your exposure." He opened his mouth to respond, but I raised a hand, silencing him. "You thought I was weak. You told your friends I would crumble with one push. But look at me. I am still standing, and you are the one trembling. That folder is not just paper. It is the mirror showing you exactly what you are. Nothing. A man who spit on the owner of the house he begged to enter. A man who laughed while drowning in debt. A man who built his life on illusions and who is about to be unmasked. His face reddened with rage, his fists clenching. For a moment I thought he might strike me, but then his hand faltered, his eyes flicked to the door, and the fight drained from him. He knew the truth. He could not win here, not in this room, not against me. I picked up the folder, tucking it back into my purse. My voice was calm, almost gentle, but every word carried the weight of finality. "The public reveal is coming, Matthew. You will stand in front of every guest, every friend, every creditor, and you will hear the truth from my lips. You spit on me in this ballroom. Tonight the ballroom will spit you out." He staggered back, his breath uneven, his mask of control shattered. I unlocked the door and turned the handle. But before I left, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. "Enjoy your last moments as the King of Ashes," I said, quietly. "The fire is coming." Then I stepped out, leaving him alone in the dim lounge surrounded by shards of glass and the crumpled remains of his arrogance. When I left the lounge, my pulse was steady, my hands no longer trembling. The folder in my purse felt less like paper and more like a weapon heavy with decades of sacrifice and silent victories. Matthew had seen the truth in private, but the time had come to tear away his mask in front of everyone. If humiliation had been my role all evening, then revelation would be my final act. I walked back into the ballroom, the music swelling, couples spinning under the chandeliers, laughter spilling like champagne bubbles. The orchestra reached a crescendo as Anna and Matthew stepped onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. She glowed in her white gown, radiant beautiful, while he held her with a grin stretched too wide the edges, cracking with the fear I had planted in him moments ago. He caught my eye from across the room, and for the first time all night his smirk faltered. He knew what was coming. I moved slowly toward the center, each step deliberate, each breath steady. The crowd swayed and laughed, oblivious, until I reached the edge of the dance floor. I raised a hand toward the orchestra, and Dawson, who had been waiting for my signal, gave a sharp nod. The music screeched to a halt. Conversations faltered. Glasses clinked in awkward silence. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice clear, carrying across the room. "Forgive the interruption. There is something that must be said before this evening continues." Whispers rustled like wind through dry leaves. Anna froze in the middle of the floor, her smile collapsing, her eyes narrowing. "Mother," she hissed under her breath. "What are you doing?" I ignored her. I reached into my purse and withdrew the folder, placing it on the nearest table and flipping it open. Tonight I began my tone. Even I was spat on, mocked, and humiliated in this very room. I was told I was an embarrassment, that I was worthless, that I did not belong here. My gaze swept the crowd, landing on the faces that had laughed at me earlier. They shifted uncomfortably, now their whispers dying. But what none of you knew, what not even my daughter knew, is that this ballroom, these chandeliers, these very walls you are celebrating inside belong to me. Gasps erupted, sharp and incredulous. Guests craned their necks, eyes darting between me and the folder of documents. I lifted one page high, the ink shimmering under the lights. "My name is Linda Harris. For 30 years, I have owned and expanded the Harris Hotel Group. This hotel and 12 others across 3 states are mine. Every glass of champagne you have drunk tonight, every plate of food you have eaten, was served under my roof." The silence cracked into chaos. Murmurs surged through the crowd, disbelief mixing with awe. Some clutched their pearls, others pulled out phones to record. Matthew's family turned pale, their arrogance dissolving into horror. And Anna, my daughter, stared at me as though she had never seen me before. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's not true. You clean apartments, you live in a tiny flat, I chose to live simply," I interrupted, my voice steady. "Because visible wealth attracts vultures. Because I wanted you to grow up valuing love and character, not money. I let the world believe I was ordinary because invisibility was my shield. But tonight your husband forced me to reveal the truth." All eyes swung to Matthew. His face was red sweat beading on his forehead. He opened his mouth, stammering, "She's lying. She's trying to ruin our wedding. Don't listen." Dawson stepped forward, then his deep voice cutting across the noise. "I can confirm every word. I have worked under Mrs. Harris for 20 years. She is the sole owner of this hotel. These documents are real." He held up one of the deeds, his signature as witness, scrawled at the bottom. "The truth is undeniable. The crowd erupted again, gasps turning into shocked exclamations. Some guests shook their heads in disbelief. Others stared at Matthew with thinly veiled contempt. The man who had mocked me only hours ago now looked like a cornered animal, his mask stripped away. And then I delivered the twist I had saved for last. I lifted another document, my hand steady. What none of you also knew is that tonight's wedding, all of it was funded by me. The ballroom rental, the catering, the flowers, the orchestra, every cent was paid through my accounts. I chose to do it not as a gift, but as a test of whether my daughter and her new husband valued me for who I am not, for what I own. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room, this time tinged with anger, not at me, but at them. Guests exchanged knowing glances, some shaking their heads in disgust. A woman near the front whispered loudly, "They spat on the very person who paid for their celebration." Anna's face crumpled, her eyes wide with horror. "Mother!" She began, her voice trembling, but I raised a hand silencing her. "You called me an embarrassment. You erased me from your photographs. You told me to sit in the shadows so I wouldn't ruin your perfect night. And yet, without me, there would be no night. Without me, this entire charade collapses. Tell me, Anna, what does that say about you, about the man you married?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of the truth crashed down. Matthew tried one last desperate attempt, raising his voice above the murmurs. "This doesn't change anything. Anna is mine, and together we'll—" But his words were drowned out by the crowd. Whispers turned into judgment, judgment into condemnation. Arrogant, pathetic, a parasite. The same mouths that had laughed at me now sneered at him. The tide had turned. I closed the folder, my voice rising one final time. I stood silent tonight because I wanted to see their true faces, and now I have. Let it be known I may dress simply, I may live quietly, but I am not weak. I am not worthless. I am the owner of this house, and I will not be spat on in my own palace. The applause that followed shocked even me. It began with a single pair of hands, then another, then a wave of clapping that grew until the ballroom shook with it. Not polite applause, but thunderous, righteous, defiant. I stood taller, my chest lifting as decades of invisibility peeled away. I was no longer hidden. I was no longer weak. I was Linda Harris, and my truth had set me free. Across the room, Matthew stood frozen, his mask shattered. His friends turned their backs on him. His family whispered in panic, and Anna crumbled, torn between shame and regret. But the night was no longer theirs. It was mine. The storm had broken, and I was the one, standing in the center of its calm. The applause had not even died down when the first witness stepped forward. Dawson, the general manager, remained at my side, calm and steady, his presence, like an anchor in the storm. But then others emerged one by one, like sparks igniting a blaze. Clara, the laundry supervisor, pushed her way through the crowd, her voice clear and strong. "I've worked here for 25 years, she announced, her eyes flashing as she pointed toward me. "And I've always known who Mrs. Harris really was. She built this hotel. She kept hundreds of us employed, and tonight she was spat on like she was nothing. Shame on every one of you who laughed." Her words struck the room like a whip. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their eyes, others whispering excuses. The same people who had sneered now tried to melt into the wallpaper. But Clara's declaration had already torn away their mask of respectability. Then came the sound I hadn't expected, a voice calling out from the back. I filmed it. All heads turned as a young man, one of the guests, lifted his phone high. I filmed him spitting on her dress. The whole ballroom should see what kind of man he really is. Before Matthew could protest, the screen lit up. A shaky video played across the phone, projected by murmurs rippling through the crowd. There I was standing in my simple wine-colored dress, my clutch trembling in my hands. There was Matthew, his face twisted with contempt, leaning forward. The spit, the insult, the laughter captured forever in pixels and sound. Gasps echoed through the hall as the cruelty replayed, undeniable and raw. "Send it to me," another guest demanded. "Everyone needs to see this." Phones lit up like fireflies as the video spread from hand to hand, from text to text, from whisper to roar. By the time Matthew lunged forward trying to snatch the device, it was too late. The footage had already escaped the walls of the ballroom. The internet had taken hold, and the world was about to witness his humiliation. Anna's face drained of color. "Matthew, what did you do?" she whispered, her voice breaking. But he ignored her, his eyes darting wildly as guests began to back away, unwilling to be associated with him. His friends slipped toward the exit, shaking their heads, murmuring excuses. His family huddled together, panic etched into their faces. The empire of appearances he had built was collapsing faster than he could contain it. And then, like a match tossed onto gasoline, another witness stepped forward. A man in a tailored suit, one of the vendors for the wedding, raised his hand. "You want to know who paid me?" he said loudly. "Not the Carters, not Matthew. Every check, every invoice was signed by her." He pointed directly at me. "Mrs. Harris. Without her, this wedding wouldn't even exist." The guests erupted again, voices clashing in shock and outrage. The humiliation had shifted entirely now, the spotlight burning Matthew and his family to ash. I stood still in the center, not triumphant, not gloating, but steady, watching the fire I had lit spread across the room. The whispers became condemnation, the laughter turned to disgust, and the man who had spat on me hours earlier now stood, isolated, cornered, stripped of allies. Anna's sobs grew louder. She clutched her veil with trembling hands, looking between me and Matthew, her world unraveling in real time. For the first time, I saw not arrogance in her eyes, but terror. Terror that she had chosen wrong. Terror that she had married a man who had built his life on lies. Terror that the mother she had despised was the only one still standing with dignity intact. As the crowd surged with questions, I raised my hand once more. Silence rippled through the room, fragile but complete. I let my voice carry calm but firm. For years, I chose silence. I chose invisibility, and many of you thought that meant weakness. Tonight, you witnessed the truth. The man who spit on me called himself strong, but his strength was illusion, and those who laughed with him are complicit. Let this be a reminder: dignity does not come from wealth flaunted or clothes worn. Dignity comes from truth, and truth will always burn away lies. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy, undeniable. I looked around the room at the faces that had mocked me only hours before. Some nodded slowly, shame in their eyes. Others stared at the floor, unwilling to meet my gaze. The tide had turned so completely that even I felt dizzy at its force. And then Dawson leaned toward me, his voice low but audible enough for others nearby to hear. "Mrs. Harris, the press, is already outside. The video spread faster than we thought. Reporters are waiting. Do you want to speak to them?" My breath caught. It was one thing to unmask Matthew here in this ballroom. It was another to let the world in. But I realized then that the fire was already beyond my control. This was no longer just my humiliation, my redemption. It was a public reckoning. The choice was simple: step into the storm or retreat. And I knew after decades of hiding, retreat was no longer an option. I straightened my voice, carrying once more. This is no longer private. This is no longer just about me. If you believe dignity matters more than appearances, if you believe truth matters more than lies, then remember what you saw tonight. Remember who spat, who laughed, and who stood in silence until the moment mattered. The guests shifted, murmurs rising again, but this time not against me. This time they were with me. Some clapped, others nodded firmly. A few even began to chant my name softly, "Linda, Linda," until the sound grew, filling the air with something I had never expected to hear again: respect. I felt my chest swell, not with arrogance, but with the relief of a lifetime's weight lifting. The secret I had carried so long was out, the chains of invisibility shattered. The witnesses had spoken, the fire had spread, and there was no turning back. So I looked at the cameras already flashing near the doors at the reporters' gathering, and I thought, let the world know. Let them all see what happens when truth finally rises. But before I walked into that storm, I turned one last time to the crowd. If you were here tonight, if you saw the cruelty and the truth side by side, tell me, what would you have done? Would you have stood in silence, or would you have spoken up? Comment with the number 1 if you would have defended me, and hit, like if you know silence makes you complicit. The room went still, waiting, the fire burning brighter. The witnesses had spoken, the world was watching, and the story was no longer mine alone. It was everyone's. The night ended not with music or laughter, but with silence heavy enough to suffocate. The ballroom that had once roared with cruel amusement now trembled with shame. Matthew stood in the center of it all, abandoned by his friends, disowned by his allies, his face pale as chalk. His family huddled near the exit, whispering frantically, but no one moved to help him. The man who had strutted through the night like a king was now a prisoner in his own cage of arrogance. By the time the guests began to leave, heads shaking, voices low with gossip, his name was already ruined. The video had spread like wildfire across the city, groom spits on millionaire mother-in-law. Within hours, social media was ablaze. Strangers condemned him. Commentators dissected his every sneer, his every word. By morning, creditors would be calling, investors would be fleeing, and his empire of lies would collapse into rubble. He hadn't just spat on me. He had spat on his own future. Anna remained frozen on the dance floor, her veil crumpled in her hands, her eyes swollen with tears. She looked at me once as if searching for some anchor, some forgiveness, but I gave her none. Not yet. She had chosen her path when she turned her back on me, when she erased me from her photographs, when she let her husband spit on me without protest. Now she had to face what that choice had brought. Reporters swarmed the hotel lobby cameras, flashing voices, shouting questions. Dawson guided me through them, shielding me as best he could. "Mrs. Harris, is it true? Did you really pay for the entire wedding? What will happen to your son-in-law now?" I said little. Only this dignity is worth more than appearances. Tonight proved that. And then I stepped into the waiting car, leaving the ballroom behind. The days that followed were a storm, but not the kind that drowned me. It was Matthew's world that flooded. His company filed for bankruptcy within a week. Lawsuits piled up. Creditors seized assets. The Carter name, once boasted as a pillar of wealth, became a synonym for disgrace. Invitations were rescinded. Partnerships dissolved. He tried to salvage his reputation, claimed the video was out of context, but no one believed him. The image of spit sliding down my dress was too raw, too undeniable. It was the mark of his downfall etched into memory forever. As for Anna, she could not escape the whispers. Everywhere she went, people asked how she could have treated her own mother so cruelly. She moved out of Matthew's home within 2 weeks, though whether out of shame or necessity, I cannot say. She called me once, her voice breaking through the line. "Mother, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't understand. I listened, my heart aching, but I did not rush to forgive. Not yet. Some wounds need time. Some lessons need scars." For me, the aftermath was something unexpected. For the first time in decades, I no longer walked in shadows. The world knew my name, now knew the truth of what I had built. Articles were written, interviews requested. Some praised me as a woman of strength, others painted me as ruthless. I didn't care. What mattered was that my dignity had been restored, not by revenge, but by truth. The invisible woman was invisible no more. But I will tell you, this victory does not erase pain. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still feel the sting of that spit, the laughter of 200 voices cutting into me. Triumph may silence them, but it does not erase the memory. Perhaps it never should. Perhaps those scars are what keep us human. So what became of me, I continued to live simply, though no longer as a disguise. I wore my truth now, not my poverty. And when people looked at me, they saw not a weak old woman, but someone who had endured humiliation and risen stronger. That is worth more than gold. And as for Matthew, the world had no more room for him. His arrogance was consumed by the fire of truth, his name remembered only as a warning. That is the true aftermath, not just his ruin, but the reminder etched into every guest, every witness, every person who watched the video online that dignity once reclaimed can burn away even the most powerful lies. Weeks later, when the chaos had quieted, I stood alone before the mirror in my office high above the city. The woman who looked back at me was not the one who had cowered in a corner of the ballroom, trembling under the weight of laughter. Her shoulders were straighter now, her chin lifted, her eyes no longer darting to the floor. I had worn invisibility like armor for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand uncovered. And yet here I was, standing in the light of my own truth. For decades, I had hidden behind thrift store dresses and modest apartments, believing that safety meant silence, that humility meant erasing myself. But I understand now that humility without dignity is not strength, it is surrender. And that night at the wedding, when spit slid down my dress and 200 voices turned me into a joke, I realized surrender had lasted long enough. Truth was my only weapon. And when I finally raised it, it was sharper than I had ever imagined. I thought of Anna often. She called again, her voice softer each time, asking for forgiveness. I don't know if forgiveness comes so quickly, but I know she must face her reflection as I faced mine. Perhaps one day we will rebuild, perhaps not. But even if the bridge between us remains broken, she has learned the most important lesson, that love without respect is not love at all. As for me, I walk the halls of my hotels now without disguises. Staff greet me by name, guests shake my hand, and I no longer flinch when people stare. Let them see me. Let them know who I am. I am not invisible anymore. And I carry the memory of that night, not as a wound, but as a scar that reminds me no matter how deep, the humiliation dignity can rise from ashes. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the echo of the ballroom, the cruel laughter, the hush that followed my reveal, the thunder of applause that broke like a storm against the walls. I hold that memory close, not for revenge, but as proof that truth, though hidden, never dies. It waits. It waits for the moment when silence breaks and dignity speaks. Now, when I see strangers whispering, when I see arrogance strutting in borrowed suits, when I see cruelty dressed as power, I smile. Because I know the truth will always outlive the lie. And I ask you, watching this now, what would you have done if you were in that ballroom? Would you have laughed with the crowd, safe in numbers? Would you have turned away, pretending not to see? Or would you have stood, even for a stranger, and spoken against humiliation? Because silence, too, is a choice. Comment with the number 1 if you believe dignity is worth defending no matter the cost. Hit. Like if you know the truth always finds its voice even if it waits decades. As for me, I have made peace with my reflection. I am Linda Harris. I am not invisible, and I will never surrender my dignity again.